We heard from the stock exchange early this morning. We saw it when it opened. We heard what the stocks and shares have been doing during the morning on news of the Tory victory from Brian Woodlake. He went from there, apparently, to celebrate in suitable stock exchange style a Tory victory with champagne in the champagne bar. And this is his report on what the stockbrokers
make of this result. On the floor of the stock exchange, but at least it's a good deal livelier down here. This is one of the city's many bars where busy jobbers and brokers come to slake their thirsts after a busy morning's work. The champagne corks may not be popping, but the beer and the gin and tonics are going down well. So let's hear what some of them have got to say for themselves. What did you make of this election? Was it a good result?
A very good result, yes.
Is it going to be good for the economy?
Yes, definitely. In the long run, certainly.
What about you, sir?
Yes, I think it's a tremendous result, very satisfactory, and hopefully Margaret Thatcher gets through all the points in her manifesto that she wishes to succeed in.
Do you think she's going to get the economy right?
Yes, I'm sure they will. I'm quite confident.
Would you like to come in here a bit more into the light? What sort of a result was it for you?
Well, it's pretty much expected result. I think it's a shame that the SDP and the Liberals didn't do better. I think the country needs a change, you know, always arguing, basically.
Is it going to be good for business?
Well, yeah, the pound's definitely firmer, and I think on the long run it probably will be.
What about you, sir? What sort of result did you think it was?
It was a good result for Britain. Certainly, investment from overseas is certainly going to pick up because they've got a firm economy, and the other onshore countries are going to invest in Britain. But it was a bit last night seeing the results come through and seeing vote after vote, Liberals coming second and the Alliance coming second, was a bit sort of a slate on the British voting system.
You don't like it? You don't like first past the post?
Well, I think it just stunk. It just left a foul taste in your mouth. But nevertheless, that's the way to do it, and there's no way anybody's going to change it because the party in power, it suits them to do it. So you've just got to like it and lump it.
Does our present voting system, sir, leave a foul taste in your mouth?
Not at all. I think the voting structure is superb. Certainly some of the other parties who were in opposition some time ago, they certainly didn't vote against this structure. However, I think that Margaret Thatcher being re-elected is good for the country, it's good for the free world, good for the Western world, and I think we ourselves will lead the way.
What do you think today would have been like if the Labour Party had got back into business?
Absolute panic. Absolute panic. Pound sterling probably about £1.20. Everything else would have dropped. It would have been absolute panic. But I mean, things are good.
Do you think there would have been panic if Michael Foot had got back?
Well, nobody would have. There would be no trade at all. We would have had to wait till Monday because the Treasury would have stepped in and stopped any trade at all. It was, you know, there was the fear that Michael Foot was going to get in. Certainly, it left shivers down your spine. It was horrible.
Thank you very much indeed. Now back to you, David, in the studio.
And while Mrs. Thatcher is having her, no doubt, elegant, though I'm sure modest lunch at number 10, the leader of the Liberal Party is enjoying a rather more robust meal. He clearly has learnt to slice a joint and doesn't need lessons from anyone.
That's quite right. I think David Steele was just saying at this moment that it's certainly a celebration and not a wake, and we are carving the fatted lamb. That's right, isn't it?
Who are you talking to?
I'm talking to Mr. David Dimbleby. Do you want to have a word with him?
Thank you very much.
Yes, I want to offer him a slice of this.
Offer him. Is David Dimbleby? I can't hear. I haven't got an earphone.
Well, it's all right. He's on that camera over there.
Well, he can have a...
David Dimbleby. I've got a slice for him.
I didn't meet him at all during the campaign. David, I'm sorry you're not getting any of this nice lamb. It's home-reared, and I firmly recommend it.
The Liberals always live very well.
We pride ourselves on
We didn't have any lunch breaks, did we?
No lunch breaks during the campaign. We're making up for it now.
David, Robin
had all the lunch breaks. We were most
No,
envious.
you mustn't make remarks of that kind.
I didn't say anything about anything else.
Anyway, we're in good spirits after the election. We realise that the Labour Party has lost over 100 deposits, and the Alliance as a whole only lost about a dozen, and I think that indicates the cut into the political mould that we have made. And, no, cutting into the land. I'm talking politics again. Right.
And very nice to be having a lunch like that, I must say. Anyway, the joke about carving joints, if you didn't catch Sir Robin Day's interview with Mrs. Thatcher, was that she was asked whether she was a good butcher on cabinets, and she said that she wasn't a butcher, but she had learnt to carve. And I was saying, clearly, David needs no lessons in that. Well, is this man behind me now, not that one, but this one, the next Chancellor of the Exchequer, possibly? Next Home Secretary? Who knows? It's Leon Britton, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, one of the rising stars of Mrs. Thatcher's cabinet, who's just been returned for Richmond, Yorkshire, and he's there with Ian Smith.
Leon Britton, are you the next Chancellor of the United Kingdom of Great Britain? Or are you the next Home Secretary?
I think you must ask Mrs. Thatcher questions like that. What I do know is that I'm the next Member of Parliament for Richmond, which has just been announced.
Indeed, and congratulations on that.
Thank you very
but
much.
let me just ask you, what do you think would be going through Mrs. Thatcher's mind as she discusses what composition she would have of the Cabinet? What would make her, for example, decide that Geoffrey Howe should move from the Treasury, maybe to the Foreign Office?
I have no idea whether such thoughts are going through her head.
No, but
I think
assist us
that
to speculate.
the job of any Prime Minister must be to put the right people in the right places in terms of their ability, of their interests, of the balance within a cabinet. And it's very difficult to say anything more interesting than a general observation of that kind.
No, but there would be an argument in favour of having the former Treasury Minister going to the Foreign Office, would there not, in terms of economic policy?
Well, I'm not going to discuss who should go to which job. I think that is a matter which I'm quite content to leave to Mrs. Thatcher.
Well, do you want to stay in your present job as Chief Secretary of the Treasury?
I've enjoyed doing it enormously. I think it's an extremely important and worthwhile job. But if I'm asked to do something else, I'm sure what I will be asked to do will be something which will be also worthwhile and important.
Well, let me ask you this. What do you think are the absolute economic priorities now that the election has been won?
The absolute economic priorities are to do nothing to impede the recovery that has already started. That means continuing with the priority for bringing inflation down, because it has been bringing down inflation that has actually led to the recovery. And therefore, that is what we should continue to do.
Now, do you really believe that it is possible to get unemployment down in this next phase?
Yes, I think it is possible to get unemployment down. I think governments rightly don't predict when it's going to come down or by how much, because it isn't dependent totally on what governments do. It's dependent, for example, on how much people take out of the economy in terms of pay. But that if we are able to continue improving our competitiveness and bringing inflation down, we will find that the benefits of that show up in job prospects in the fair league, and certainly in the middle distance, is something that I would expect.
In today's Economist, it's argued that Mrs. Thatcher has now laid to rest the whole argument about the EEC, but that she will attack very strongly the EEC on the question of the budget and possibly threaten to withdraw our own payments to the EEC over the next phase.
Well, quite sure that the question of Britain's withdrawal from the EEC is no longer a live issue in British politics. I mean, I really do believe that it's been rather interesting that the Labour Party obviously thought that that was something which would attract votes, but in fact people were frightened off them by that as much as anything else. But certainly we've got a battle on our hands to ensure that Britain's level of contributions to the community budget is appropriate and not excessive. And I think that the Prime Minister will be greatly fortified in that battle by the knowledge that she has so large a mandate from the people of this country behind her.
Leon Britton, the new member for Richmond, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Back now to Dave Dimbleby in the studio.
Well, that was Leon Britton in Richmond, Yorkshire, and here back in Hampstead from Wales,
I'm not giving any...
Mr. and Mrs. Foote, and Mr. Foote saying he's not going to give any interviews, I
I
think.
a little late earlier that I was not giving any interview now, and you must all abide by it because that's the only way to be fair to the others too. So
Will you be making a statement?
I'm not giving any interview now.
Will you be giving it?
I'm not giving any interview now, and that's it, and that's the end.
Do you mind to get much sleep, Mr. Foote?
No, I'm not giving any interview at all, you know, and you must recognise it. When I say it, it's not fair to the others who've been here waiting all this morning. I said I wasn't giving an interview to them, and so I'm not giving it to you, and you must understand it, and that's the only way to play fair, and all of you who are journalists must understand that that's the proper way to do things.
Do you expect to give one later?
I'll consider it, as I said.
Pilgrims Lane, Hampstead, Jill Craigie, who supported Michael Foot right through that campaign, and Michael Foot, and still, it seems, while not wanting to give an interview, not quite able absolutely to remain silent and get in the car and drive away, but telling everybody that he really wasn't going to say anything for the moment. And no doubt wants to go away and consider, as he said, his position and announce a decision of some sort when he's consulted colleagues in his own good time. We've had a second result in from Northern Ireland you might like to see. The official unionist Martin Smythe, who went into this constituency when Robert Bradford was assassinated, has held the seat, but there's been a considerable change in the vote. His majority is 9,700 in this middle-class constituency, but just look at the share of the vote. The Alliance Party is second, 24, the Democratic Unionists at 12, the SDLP at 9, and now the change since the last election. And there the opposite has happened to the first result we had in from Northern Ireland. There the switch has been among the unionist parties, the orange parties, has been from the official unionists back to the Democratic Unionists, Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionist Party. Anyway, the seat taken by the official unionists. Now it's 1340, 22 roughly, and we've now got 18 seats to come in. We're still waiting on Enoch Powell's result. We still want to know whether John Hume is going to come to the House of Commons. We still haven't officially had Jerry Fitt's result from Ireland. So we're waiting for on all those three and for further developments from the party leaders and the rest. In the meantime, Peter.
Well, David, if you thought Mr. Foot looked a bit upset there when we saw him in the street, you can see from this picture just why he should be. There are the gains for the Conservatives that make this the best Conservative victory since the 30s and the worst Labour disaster, really, since the 20s. Labour on 13 gains only. Those are really from the Social Democrats. The Liberal SDP alliance on 7 and the others on 0. Now notice the way those Conservative gains build up as you come down the country. There has been a regional divergence. The Tories are doing better as you move south, and they're doing better as you move into the cities, into the towns. This is the battleground between the Tories and Labour. There are the vulnerable Labour seats falling to the Conservatives. They've turned blue as we go down the list. You can see as they get less and less vulnerable to the Tories are still moving in there, inroads into that more safe Labour marginal territory, still persevering right down there. Blackburn is the first one that Labour could hold, number 23. These are seeded in order of vulnerability. They're holding on to West Bromwich East. Burnley, they're doing better in the northwest than in the south and the Midlands. Seats in the Midlands falling like 9 pins to the Tories. Holding on better as you go down, further down this list. We chose 60 of these marginal Labour seats. Bristol East, there's Tony Benn's seat in Bristol East. And there is Bridgend in Wales, going to the Tories as well. Big swing to the Tories in Wales, just like the rest of the country. Only in Scotland, really, did the Labour Party manage to hold on. And there is our target. That is the Labour target the Conservatives have been firing at. Let's just see how far they've managed to penetrate into the middle of those rings there. If they hit the whole of that target, they're looking like getting 60 gains off Labour. And there are the shots. Each one of those a Tory gain, each one of the little shots on the target. 34 hits, 34 gains, 25 misses. Labour have held 25 of those marginal seats.
Now, with me here at the table is Joan Ruddock, the head of CND. And CND was, at the start of this election, it was said, was going to play a prominent part in the Labour campaign. It didn't appear to play a very prominent part. Were you elbowed out by someone?
Well, we never said we'd play a prominent part in the Labour campaign. We were going to play a prominent part for ourselves. We did that. We were very active in the constituencies. We had many meetings. We distributed 4 million leaflets. But the national media, for obvious reasons, paid attention, I think, almost solely to the party leaders. So we really didn't get coverage.
And do you think it was Labour's commitment to a slightly muddled, albeit slightly muddled, unilateral plank that helped cause this massive defeat? Because the evidence is that unilateral nuclear disarmament is not a popular issue with voters, isn't it?
I think what happened was that Mrs. Thatcher did not put her policy to the electorate, which was a policy and is a policy of massive increase in nuclear weapons, and particularly of war-fighting nuclear weapons, a whole new generation, Cruise and Trident. So that wasn't put, and if the people had pronounced on that, it might have been rather different.
Yeah, but could you now answer my
Indeed,
question?
I want to do just that. We had that on one side. On the other side, as you rightly say, we had a confused position in the Labour Party. And I think when you're talking about defence, which CND very much believes in, it is important to be clear about the policy you're offering the electorate. But none of the parties were very clear, I have to say.
But nevertheless, people who wanted unilateral disarmament would have been attracted at least by the Labour policy, wouldn't they? Because it was much closer to CND's position than anything that any other party was offering. And yet all the polls suggest that actually the unilateral position isn't popular with the voters.
The unilateralists who understand the position are around 20%, and they have always, when polled, said they would be in favour of that policy. What happened in this election was a failure, I think, to gain additional votes. We haven't lost. Our basis for support in the electorate is the same as it's always been.
Have you lost the argument over the cruise and Pershing missiles? You saw, no doubt, President Mitterrand, the socialist president of France, saying that he now thought that cruise and Pershing were inevitably going to come to Europe, that was the right policy by the autumn.
I think it's possible that they will come, but clearly if such weapons come, the peace movement will only campaign to get rid of them again. And the polls that were taken midway in the general election showed that a majority of people in Britain oppose having the cruise missiles and they oppose having Trident. And could I just add about the lack of support for, say, unilateralist candidates? Much has been mentioned about Joan Lester's position, but no one's mentioned that a number of the Liberal gains in this election have been by Liberal supporters of CND and well-known people on public platforms of CND.
So very briefly, what is CND going to do now? I mean, this was, in theory, you must have seen this election as a great opportunity, with for the first time a Labour Party apparently fairly firmly committed to getting rid of the British deterrent and of all other of American bases and all the rest of it. It failed, lamentably. What's going to happen now? What's your plan?
Oh, our plan is to go on campaigning as vigorously as ever. We know that our methods actually work, despite what you're saying. We've increased our membership enormously in the last 3 years. It would have been very surprising if, on the very first occasion that a choice were put to the people, that they were actually able to come to a decision on this matter. It takes a lot of public education and information. We don't see this as a failure we really will be going on with our campaign.
Joan Ruddock, thank you very much. And now let's go to Belfast West for the declaration of the result there. This is Jerry Fitt's result.
To just about hear the West Belfast declaration. Of course, it's a foregone conclusion at this stage. Gerry Adams, the Vice President of Sinn Féin, is expected to comfortably take this seat from the outgoing MP, Jerry Fitt. Jerry Fitt is up there on the platform. We're awaiting Gerry Adams, Sinn Féin, to come in, and the returning officer, Deputy Returning Officer, Mrs. Roberta Colquhoun. The story of the day really has been the size of Gerry Adams' majority, the size of Gerry Adams' vote. We don't know as yet what that is going to be, but the speculation that it could be in excess of 20,000 votes. Now, Adams stood in the Northern Ireland Assembly elections last October and polled just under 10,000 votes. So if he were to get up around 20,000 in this Westminster election, it would be a remarkable increase in Sinn Féin's share of the vote. Talking to Jerry Fitt and Joe Hendren of the SDLP earlier, they're both, not only did they concede defeat, but the expectations of their share of the vote didn't seem to be very high. Now, of course, if here comes Adams in the top right-hand corner of your picture there, just going out of shot, there seems to be some delay in coming to the announcement of the result. But if Adams were to win this seat, he would be the first Sinn Féin MP to be elected to Westminster since 1955. Although Owen Carron, who is now a member of Sinn Féin, was elected after the hunger strikes of 1981. He subsequently became a member of Sinn Féin, or declared himself to be a member of Sinn Féin. But before that, Sinn Féin hadn't won a Westminster seat since 1955. And indeed, if you go back to 1955 and look at Sinn Féin's share of the vote then, when Northern Ireland had 12 constituencies, now it is 17, they contested all 12 and returned 2 MPs to Westminster, although they abstained. They really had no option but to abstain. They were prisoners at the time in Crumlin Road Jail. But Sinn Féin at that time polled 150,000 votes. And Gerry Adams and Sinn Féin have set themselves a target of 90,000 votes overall in Northern Ireland in this election. Now, if Adams gets 20,000 here, he could be well on the way to getting near that target because they have Sinn Féin contestants in all 17 constituencies here. Well, we were promised this result, but there does seem to be some delay. I don't think there's any real problem, no late difficulty. But as you can see around here, there's a fair bit of very intense media interest, a lot of cameras in the vicinity, and there has been surprisingly little trouble in the Belfast City Hall, despite the mixing of Republican and Loyalist supporters in the chambers here. Now, of course, if Gerry Fitt, well, it's not a question of if, it's a question of he will lose his seat now. There's speculation as to what his political future might be. There's been talk of him perhaps accepting a peerage were it offered to him, but that, of course, is only speculation. And indeed, we're just going to have to speculate about when the result is going to come through in West Belfast. For the moment, I'm going to hand you back to David Dimbleby in London.
We'll go back there as soon as we get a result. We'll keep an eye on it. And in the meantime, Alan Beath's result, Liberal Chief Whip in the last Parliament, holding on to his seat in Berwick-on-Tweed. Let's join Robin Day and his guests for a moment. Robin.
Well, we're joined by a minister in the government, Kenneth Clarke, and I think, if I may, I hope I don't embarrass him by saying, judging by what the Prime Minister said in her brief interview with us in Downing Street this morning, Kenneth Clarke is the sort of person who ought to be standing by on his telephone this weekend for possible promotion to the Cabinet. I hope I haven't embarrassed you, Kenneth.
Well, my first desire, actually, is to be asked to serve in the government again. At my rank in the government, that's, I think, the only thing I aim at. I've enjoyed serving in the first period of office. I'd rather like to be asked again.
Hold on a moment. I'll come back to you. Belfast West.
Well, now we're going to get the result in Belfast West. Mrs. Roberta Colquhoun there in the centre of your picture, about to come and announce the results. Gerry Adams to her right.
This is the result for the Belfast West constituency. I, Roberta Colquhoun, Deputy Returning Officer for the constituency of Belfast West, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Gerard Adams,
Sinn Féin,
16,379. Gerard Fitt,
Independent Socialist,
10,326. George Albert Haffey,
DUP,
2,399. Joseph Gerard Hendren,
SDLP,
10,934. Mary McMahon,
Workers' Party,
1,893. Thomas Passmore,
Official Unionist,
2,435. And I declare that the person elected to serve as member for the said constituency is Gerard Adams.
So a clear win for Gerry Adams, but not quite the margin of victory that we were expecting earlier on. Something in the region of 6,000, just under 6,000 votes. And interestingly there, if you look at the SDLP and Gerry Fitt vote combined, they would have exceeded Gerry Adams' vote.
in Yelga, in Archanga, a Weahers, a Horge, Hig, Miss Colquhoun.
While he's speaking, Michael Foot, arriving at Labour headquarters in Walworth Road for the first discussions, no doubt about that election result. With Dizzy the dog, who accompanied him so many times on Hampstead Heath walks during the campaign. Vincent Hanna's down there. Well, Vincent just trying to get a word with him, and I think not quite succeeding. So let's go back to Belfast West and Gerry Adams of Sinn Féin.
Though I take personal satisfaction from it. It's a victory for all those people who worked over the last 2 or 3 weeks and all those people who have suffered over the decades I'd like to pay a very special tribute in Yilga Arish to all the people who worked for this Sinn Féin electoral victory in West Belfast. Electoral politics will never be the same again. For too long, working people, both Protestant and Catholic, have been duped by career politicians. That has stopped. Sinn Féin will represent, to the best of our ability, all the people of West Belfast, regardless of their political or religious affiliations. The British government, which is now a strong British government, have the opportunity once again to bring peace to this country of ours. This morning, a British soldier was killed in Ballymurphy. The responsibility for that soldier's death lies with the British government. The tragedy of Ireland rests with the London government. That British soldier should not have been in Ballymurphy. Thank you all. As the blanket man said, as the hunger striker said, Chucky our la. This is one of those days which will be remembered. Bur bu, Gormila Mayograph.
Jerry Fitt, the defeated...
Mr. Deputy Returning Officer, I would like to second the vote of thanks which has proposed by the victor in this contest. You will have noticed that there was an awful lot of jerks in this contest, which gives some indication of how we are politically motivated. The facts are in this contest that earlier on in the count, both myself and Dr. Hendren were told some very misleading information that there had been a massive landslide in support of the Sinn Féin candidate. As you will have seen by the figures, this is patently not so. The victory of Sinn Féin in this election is not indeed a massive victory, and the majority of votes cast were indeed against the organisation of which Mr. Adams is a member, which supports and unambiguously supports the armed struggle, i.e. murder and maiming and killing and the murder of the British soldier in West Belfast this morning. A significant number of people in West Belfast yesterday voted for that type of confrontation, but the majority of people did not. And on the question of career politicians and the representation of the working class, I have been beaten in this election, but anyone who was at my count this morning will see that half of my votes came from the Protestant working class on the Shankill Road and the other half came from the Catholic working class on the Falls Road. If I am to be defeated in this election, then it is some consolation for me to know that what I have striven to do all my political life, to unite the Catholic and Protestant working class in this sadly divided city, I did yesterday afternoon. And if this is to be an historic count, then yesterday afternoon at the polls when the people went to the ballot box was even more historic. I hope that the people in West Belfast who voted for the Sinn Féin candidate did not do so consciously believing that they were supporting the armed struggle, a continuation of the murderous campaign that we have had for all too long in Northern Ireland. Jerry Adams is now the Member of Parliament for West Belfast. He has stated that he is not going to attend Westminster. He will therefore be unable to put forward the points of view which are so necessary to be put forward in the only places where remedies can be taken. I have been beaten in this election. Earlier on, I had thought that I might bow out of politics in Northern Ireland. But the vote right across the political and sectarian divide which I got yesterday impels me to rethink my position. And I have no doubt in the future that Sinn Féin, the party of violence, will be rejected by the overwhelming majority of the people in that constituency.
Well, a final speech there from Jerry Fitt, standing as an independent in Belfast West, stood there for, well, ever since 1966, and that seat taken by Sinn Féin, Jerry Adams, a man who said he supported and defended the right of the IRA to engage in armed resistance, man banned from coming to London by the Home Secretary last December, though he held secret talks in London with the British government. in 1972 with a Conservative government. Gerry Adams takes that seat, and this is the share of the vote, and it's quite a complicated picture, what's happened there in Belfast West. There is the share of the vote with Sinn Féin in the darker green, the SDLP in the lighter green, and Gerry Fitt in that sort of indigo colour, pale indigo in the middle. The change, though, is the one that's interesting, because it shows, as Gerry Fitt mentioned, the official unionist down 12%. Gerry Fitt, who stood for SDLP before, gets the whole of his 23%, as Sinn Féin does. But as he was claiming, his vote has come both from Catholics in the SDLP and from unionists. It's the one thing that he always said would be worthwhile in a parliamentary election if he could get both the Catholic and the unionist vote out for himself as a socialist in Belfast West. Well, he did it, but he didn't win the seat. Now, listening to that result, watching it, is a man waiting to see whether he's going to come to Westminster. The present leader of the SDLP, the man who replaced Gerry Fitt, John Hume, has also got a Sinn Féin candidate up against him, and he's in his constituency of Foyle, talking to James Robbins.
John Hume, leader of the SDLP, what's your reaction to your predecessor as founding leader of the party being put out in West Belfast and Gerry Adams being elected?
Well, in relation to the political demise of Gerry Fitt, could I say that I regret the differences that arose between us over the past number of years, and the word regret is putting it mildly. I know that my party supporters would want me to say something much stronger because there have been very serious differences, but I think it's sad to see any political figure bite the dust. And Gerry Fitt in his own time made a major contribution to the politics of Northern Ireland, particularly in the 60s. I regret the direction that he has taken in the last couple of years, naturally, but I think that history will look kindly on what he did on his own in the 60s. In relation to the overall result, it was predictable. We as a party knew that there was a clear anti-violence majority in West Belfast. If you add up the Joe Hendren's vote, Gerry Fitt's vote and the Worker Party vote, you have over 23,000 votes as opposed to Adams' 16,000. It was regrettable that that vote was split. I'm confident that that anti-violence majority will be maintained, and I would think that the seat has been simply borrowed by Sinn Féin.
Now, you put up an SDLP candidate in West Belfast against Gerry Fitt, your predecessor as leader. Wasn't that a mistake? Because surely your SDLP vote and Gerry's together could have got him into Parliament.
Well, I would have think that the mistake was on Gerry's part. I think it was clear since the local government elections last year when he lost his local government seat that he wasn't in a position to win. And as a political party, of course, we had serious differences with him about his whole approach. And as a political party, we were committed to fighting all seats right across the north of Ireland in order to maximise the total vote that supports constitutional politics. And I wouldn't apologise for doing that to anyone. I simply regret that Gerry Fitt entered the fray at this stage. I think, from his own point of view in every other way, it would have been preferable had he gone out quietly.
Now, turning to your own party's fortunes today, the major dominant party of constitutional nationalism, do you think you're going to be eclipsed by the politics of Sinn Féin?
I don't think so. I think we'll have to wait until all the votes in Northern Ireland are counted. I think my impression of the campaign was there was a strong tide in our favour, that our vote was holding strong. I think that will be the result at the end of the day, and I would wait to see all the votes counted first. There are another, I haven't heard the rest of the results around the place, but there are many counts going on, and I think that we will be happy at the end of the day to have held our vote.
But there are strong indications that Sinn Féin are biting into your vote. They are increasing their share, which seems to indicate that the nationalist people of Northern Ireland are more deeply divided than ever before, and that many more of them are going down the path of violence away from your diagnosis, which is that you should go forward to United Ireland through peaceful discussion.
Well, I mean, my diagnosis, I think I would stick very strongly to it. And I don't think anybody who intelligently looks at the situation can see a divided society being united by violence. But in relation to your diagnosis of the results, I would look at the results when they've all come in. I mean, in the early days of the Assembly election results, the first results are always in from West Belfast. When the others come in, where we are very strong, areas where we are very strong, I think you'll probably see a different picture as we saw then.
Are you confident yourself of going to Westminster to represent this constituency Foyle?
Well, the count is going on at the moment. I'm reasonably confident. The DUP candidate is polling very well, and it's basically a two-horse race.
And if you do go to Westminster, what will be your principal aim?
Well, if I go to Westminster to represent this constituency, of course, I'll have very difficult problems to deal with. There is the political problem which underlies all our situation. My major task would be to bring that to the centre stage in British politics where it ought to be, because if this problem was going on in Yorkshire, it would have been the major issue of this election. And secondly, I would be representing the constituency with the highest unemployment not only in Britain and Northern Ireland, but in the whole of the European community. And that unemployment is not unrelated to the political strength of more extremist organisations.
Now, you have said during this campaign that Northern Ireland must be discussed regularly at Westminster, and there must be real progress in Anglo-Irish relations, and if there isn't, you will take some form of direct action in the Commons. You might consider disrupting the proceedings. Is that a genuine threat?
Well, what I've said is that we will use every means at our disposal, peaceful and political means and constitutional means at our disposal, to get this matter seriously attended to. As I've already said, the Prime Minister has said that Northern Ireland is as British as Finchley. I don't know who is the more insulted by that remark, the people of Finchley or the people of Northern Ireland. But if, in fact, we were, and if this was happening in Finchley, what's happening here, I would like to think that, in fact, I would be certain that the issue would receive much more serious attention in British politics, and at the centre of British politics, the House of Commons, where there hasn't been a major debate on this issue for many, many years, where none of the parties have had serious discussions about the problem at their annual conferences.
John Hume, thank you very much.
Thank you.
James Robbins talking to John Hume, and we'll watch that result as soon as we get it. We'll bring it to you. We've had our first SDP gain of this election in Ross, Cromarty and Skye. This used to be a Liberal seat between 64 and 70, but there's an SDP majority of 1,700. Just let's see how that came about. There's the share, and here's the change in the vote since 1979, estimated. And you see the SDP taking votes all the way along the line, particularly heavily from the Scottish Nationalists, second last there, and from the Conservatives, and slightly less from Labour. Possibly that's a vote against the closure, the decline of aluminium smelting in that area. Huge Highland seat that stretches from Skye to the east coast. Anyway, the one and only SDP gain of the night. Now we've still got another, 15 seats to come. Robin.
I wonder if we could just go back to Mr. Kenneth Clarke, if he's been so kind as to remain. We were talking, if you'll remember, about your own prospects in the Cabinet. You were being very modest about it. But let me just, you might get appointed to the Cabinet this weekend, but let me ask you this. What importance do you attach to Mrs. Thatcher's remarks earlier today that she was going to have as broad a Cabinet as possible?
Oh, I'm not going to start interpreting her remarks. Earlier on, I was listening to your interview with my old friend Leon Britton, and he gave the...
Well, I'm afraid we've... Sorry, Mr. Clarke, we had a technical hitch there. Could you repeat your last two sentences, please?
I said that the Prime Minister has to decide. She's been returned to office, and she'll now decide who she wants in her government, what she wants them to do.
Thank you very much. You remain by the telephone, if I were you, this weekend. Oh, I've got to go back to David Dimbleby again.
Because in Belfast, I think we have Gerry Adams of Sinn Féin with Forbes McFall. He's just won his seat there.
Yes, we have Gerry Adams here. Gerry Adams, the new MP for West Belfast. How do you explain your victory?
Well, I think basically that people have become tired of the salaried politicians who have made a career out of people's hardship. They never had the opportunity before to vote any other way. This time they have had the opportunity, and they've seized it.
Do you see this as a vote for the IRA, continuing the IRA campaign?
I don't think the IRA need a vote to continue their campaign. The IRA received their mandate from the British presence in this country. It certainly isn't a vote against the IRA. It's a vote against all the social, economic and political difficulties which the British government visited upon this part of our country.
Do you see the IRA continuing after this vote for you?
I don't see any reason why the IRA should even take the vote into consideration. The IRA, as I've said before, and I think it's just disgusting that a political victory is now going to turn into whole discussion about the IRA. The IRA received their mandate from the British presence in this country. Sinn Féin has received a historic mandate today in West Belfast. First time ever. Even Eamon de Valera couldn't win West Belfast.
But isn't it inevitable that this question should arise because your party openly supports the IRA?
Yes, and so we should. Other parties support the British government. The British government itself has no problem supporting its troops. its forces in this country, the Unionist parties, the Loyalist parties, even the SDLP leader wines and dines with Ronald Reagan. And we see no reason, therefore, why we shouldn't defend the right of the IRA to engage in armed resistance.
But after this victory at the ballot box, do you not think that for the Republican movement, perhaps the way forward now should be the ballot box, should be constitutional politics?
That's the question that has to be put to the British government. If they listen to the ballot box, then no one will be reaching out for an arm end.
How do you intend to go from here with this victory? What do you intend to do with it?
Well, we intend to build our organisation in West Belfast. We intend to fight a council seat at the end of next month. We intend to win that as well, to strengthen our party, to use the mandate we've been given on behalf of the people and to make ourselves accountable to the people. The people in West Belfast were sold out by other politicians who betrayed the mandate given to them. Sinn Féin will never betray the mandate given to them today.
You've been excluded from London. Do you intend to go to London to challenge that ban?
I'm informed that the British government will have to change the ban. We're receiving legal advice on this. I believe that the invitation to go to London is still standing. And if all that squares out, we certainly will be in London speaking to British people and British politicians.
Now, what hope do you think you can influence Mrs Thatcher, who's been returned with a landslide majority?
Well, unfortunately, the British working class are going to be brought to their knees by Mrs Thatcher in the 4 years ahead. And the Irish working class are now back off their knees, and we will be here when Mrs Thatcher goes.
Jerry Adams, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now, let's go back to Robin and try a third time to resume the conversation. Robin.
Mr Clark, let's get onto the general pattern of this election. How do you see it now? What do you think that this is really such a good result for the Conservatives? A lower percentage of the popular vote than last time and the time before?
Oh, it's a remarkably good result. Nothing like this has happened in my lifetime. Nobody's mentioned the East Midlands, where I'm sitting now, where I think the swing's probably been as big as anywhere in the country. At one point, I was almost the lone Conservative outpost in a traditional Labour voting county, and I'm now surrounded by a sea of Conservative seats. And this is a mining county, traditional Labour country, moderate mining Labour country, and you've got to go quite a long way to find a Labour Member of Parliament around my constituency.
You're one of the few Conservative MPs and ministers whose father was a miner.
That's right, yes, and I'm glad to say that the colliery he worked down is now represented by a Conservative Member of Parliament.
What do you think will be the atmosphere in a Parliament which has a 150 Conservative majority? Very good for the Prime Minister and the government, no doubt, but doesn't it encourage, or shall I say tempt, different elements in the Conservative Party to come out in the open and hold their little groups? And
I think that's right. I think that what caused Francis Pym's remark in the interview early in the election, which caused a lot of fuss when people picked it up. I think the Whip's office will have to make sure that they keep in touch with all the party. But that's quite a good thing, rather than a bad thing. There are restraints in the political system, and the one thing that's certain is we'll keep together when we carry out our manifesto. One thing I found remarkable during the election was the idea that if we got a large majority, we'd follow different policies. I don't think that will happen.
There's no secret manifesto towards the National Health Service, for instance?
No, I took part, obviously, in one of the sillier features of the campaign. I can now reveal, with the ballot boxes all opened, that our secret manifesto in our hip pocket is the same as the manifesto we published, and we will continue to look after the National Health Service. I think the Labour Party did rather slip in into some of the cornier old style of British politics. They've been saying the Tories are against the National Health Service, I think, since 1948. And they really will have to find something new for next time.
Well, you weren't exactly in favour of it in 1948 too greatly, were you?
No, that's right. There was, I think, a mistaken vote in 1948 by the then Conservative Party. But I think the Labour Party is too stuck in the rhetoric of the 1940s, in many of the policies of the 1940s, with a rather new, nastier left-wing tinge.
Thank you very much, Mr Clark. I'm going to leave you there because your face is breaking up. Not through emotion or tiredness, but through some flickering on the television screen.
Too much celebrating, probably.
Goodbye now. Lord Evans of Claughton from the Liberal Party is with me here, and also John Golding, a senior member of the Labour Party National Executive. Lord Evans, you've been playing a central part in this campaign down in London as one of the Liberal peers. What do you say about it?
Well, obviously, the first reaction must be one of great anger. Anger not on behalf of the alliance, because of the large number of votes we won on the very few seats, but anger really on behalf of the people of this country who clearly, in a very large numbers indeed, more people voted for a moderate, middle-of-the-road party in this country than in any other European country, and we're left with a derisory number of seats. So I suspect that the British public, which is fair-minded, will feel as angry, or more angry perhaps, that their wishes have been frustrated by a grotesquely unfair electoral system. And instead of having hundreds of MPs, we have got a miserable figure of in the 20s. And I think this is absolutely outrageous.
Given that we have this situation, and may have for some time, wouldn't it make more sense if the alliance with their with the SDP, with their small number of MPs, whatever it is, 5 or 6 in the House, that they should join with the Liberal Party and stop having 2 separate parties?
This may well happen. I'm quite sure that next week conversations will be very much along those lines, but I'm quite sure that whatever happens, whether separate identities are maintained, that they will work as they have done during this election and in Parliament. They will work very closely together, and I'm quite sure that they will be very vocal and will make the views of the alliance very clearly known in a grotesquely unfair Parliament.
Do you think it's grotesquely unfair, John Golding?
No. I believe very strongly in the present electoral system. I think it is right that the British public, the electorate, be able to make a clear choice between a government and an opposition. That they've been able to do. They've made the wrong choice. But I think that it's better for them to be able to make a clear choice.
But why is it fair for the 7 million people who voted for the alliance, some 25% of the voters, to get only a couple of dozen seats compared to 10 times as many seats almost for the Labour Party?
Well, because we have in the British system representation by constituency. And that, I think, is the best political system, of one individual member responsible to his constituency. And so the present system is the best way of ensuring that individual members are elected by constituents and are accountable to them.
If anybody watching you were to say that you are rather conservative, Mr. Golding, what would you say to that?
I think if it was with a little c, and if you said I was moderate and reasonable and careful and cautious, I would agree with you.
Mr. Golding, thank you. David?
Robin, thank you very much. Well, we're joined now from Moscow, live, by Gennady Gerasimov of the Novosti press agency, who's up there in Moscow this afternoon. Mr. Gerasimov, what do you make of this majority that the British electorate has given Mrs. Thatcher in a free election?
Well, I was just listening to previous arguments, and I got the impression that the battle is still going on. Well, your electoral system is very difficult to interpret, and your Conservative Party got the majority seats in the Parliament, though it didn't get the 50% of the votes. Okay, winner takes all, and I think we are ready to talk to anybody whom your voters voted in, and I guess the address is the same, 10 Downing Street.
But
return postage guaranteed.
Would you rather have seen somebody else as Prime Minister from Moscow's point of view, with all the discussions on disarmament going on at the moment?
Well, this is your elections, and you choose your leader, and Mrs. Thatcher, President Thatcher, and I don't think that it is really a slip of the tongue, Prime Minister Thatcher, she is bossy, and apparently British people like it that way. As far as we are concerned, we would like to see more emphasis on dialogue, because now there is more emphasis on defense. So we want to have dialogue with anybody who is in power in your country.
But aren't you in any way affected by Mrs. Thatcher's determination that cruise missiles and Pershing missiles should be brought into Europe in the autumn if there's no progress in the talks? Something which the Labour Party, for instance, would certainly not have done, which the Liberals were opposed to?
Well, we know her stand, and now the battle is over, so why cry over split milk, so to say? I again just want to say that it's very peculiar for us to watch this kind of elections, and for me, personally, the decisive vote was cast in Buenos Aires, if you know what I mean.
What about your head of state, since you're there, Mr. Gerasimov. There have been reports that he is ill and that there may be some sort of leadership struggle going on in Moscow, albeit of a rather different nature from the leadership struggle that's been going on here in Britain.
No sound.
Can I try again? We've had reports that your president...
There was no sound, yes?
There's no sound?
There was no sound, yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We've had reports in this country that your president, Mr. Yuri Andropov, has been ill and that there's some sort of leadership struggle of a different kind going on there in Moscow at the moment. Is there any truth in that?
Well, no comment, only he was recently meeting the president of Finland, who was in our country as a guest.
No comment on that. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we don't seem to be hearing each other too well, Mr. Gerasimov, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm most grateful to you. Well, now, from that slightly inconclusive conversation with Moscow, let's go again to the United States for another report from Washington, I think from Martin Bell. I hope this time we may be able actually to hear what's said rather more clearly. Here's Martin Bell.
Americans awoke to find a triumphant Margaret Thatcher all over their television screens this morning. They had their own chirpy way of reporting her victory.
A top story in the news this morning. Maggie gets her landslide and a 5-year renewal of the lease at number 10. Margaret Thatcher sitting on top of the electoral world today. A landslide victory makes Mrs. Thatcher the unquestioned leader in her country. And for the opposition Labour Party, it was their worst defeat in 50 years. 5 more years of the Thatchers at number 10 Downing Street, starting today, Friday, June 10th, 1983.
Not all of Mrs. Thatcher's backers are wealthy, but some are, and they could afford to celebrate in style. After all, the Conservatives had won a landslide as big as the Ritz.
The pictures were from the BBC, but with Michael Foot being compared to George McGovern, the flavour of the commentaries was all American.
White House aides are viewing this election as a resounding endorsement of fiscal conservatism that bodes well, they say, for Republicans in next year's election.
Mrs. Thatcher's victory is good news for the Reagan administration. It means Britain remains in the U.S. corner on many key issues, including deployment of nuclear missiles in Western Europe. And it marks the first time in a long time that a Western leader has not been turned out of office after serving only 1 term.
What fascinates the Americans above all is any parallel they can find between their politics and ours. And here's a Mrs. Thatcher having coasted to victory in spite of high unemployment. It's a performance that the Republicans here would love to be able to repeat next year on their own home ground, and you can all but hear them wondering aloud, now, how did she do that?
Martin Bell reporting from Washington. Now, Michael Foot said he wasn't going to give any interviews, but he's with Vincent Hanna in Walworth Road and is apparently going to speak to him.
David, Michael Foot has made it clear that he does not want to talk about the campaign, but events in Northern Ireland has prompted him to come to our studio where he wants to say something about something else.
I think it's tragic that the next House of Commons should not have in it Gerry Fitt. I say that not only because of his courage, which has been properly extolled on every hand. His courage is something beyond all praise. He stood out against trying to settle issues by violence, put more at risk in that cause than anybody else in these islands, and therefore the admiration for his courage, I think, is spreads through everybody, certainly everybody in the House of Commons who's seen it and known it. I would also like to add, I've known him from the very first day, I think, that he came to the House of Commons. We've been very close friends since. He's a wonderful socialist. He has contributed very greatly to upholding the cause of Irish socialism. Irish socialism has a special kind of calibre and of vitality of its own. It was expressed by Gerry Fitt, and I think it's tragic that he should not be there, particularly because it's obvious that the votes of the people in his constituency would really have wished him to be there. So I hope he'll be back, and I hope he'll have the courage to be back, and I hope that people will give him the backing to come back.
Thank you very much, Michael Foot. David, back to you.
Thank you, Vincent. Well, I have with me now Professor Ivor Crewe from Essex University. He was the man who organised our extremely accurate, really astonishingly accurate prediction at 10 o'clock yesterday evening, which has virtually been borne out. Along with that questioning of voters, he asked a number of pertinent questions about why people voted the way that they did. I just want to look at one or two of these forms and then talk to him about them. This is the first one. It compares people's voting habits in the 1979, the last general election, with how they voted this time. Of those who voted Conservative in 79, 83% still voted Conservative, 3 switched to Labour, 13 to the Alliance. Of those who voted Labour in 79, 69% only continued to vote Labour, 23% went to the Alliance, 7 to the Conservatives, and of those who voted Liberal last time round, 76%, 3/4, remained faithful to the Liberal Party, 16% to the Conservatives, 8 to Labour. They're the figures. Now, Ivor, what does that tell us?
Well, it tells us the essential story about the election. Pretty solid loyalty amongst Conservatives from 1979. They weren't completely loyal. There was some slippage to the Liberals. A really massive hemorrhage of Labour support. Almost a third of those who voted Labour in 1979 deserted the Labour Party this time. And remember that the Labour vote already in 1979 was fairly low. And I think what it tells us about the Liberals of 1979 was that they really weren't quite loyal enough. I mean, you'll see from the figures that 16% switched to the Conservatives, 8% to Labour. That's about a quarter of the 1979 Liberal vote going elsewhere. If they'd stayed with the Alliance might well have got closer to 30% and indeed won, well, perhaps at least a dozen more seats.
Well, let's have a look at another one, the best person to be Prime Minister. And again, how people divided on that. This is simply those who remained loyal to the Labour Party and those who decided to quit the Labour Party.
That's right.
Those who remained loyal thought, only 46% of them thought that Michael Foot was the best person to be Prime Minister, narrowly followed by David Steel at 38, Mrs Thatcher on 9 and Roy Jenkins on 7. And those who decided not to vote for Labour, only 3% thought Michael Foot was the best person. David Steel got 57%, Margaret Thatcher 26%. Now, you think that was a reason for people leaving the Labour Party, that the leadership issue?
Well, if you compare loyal Labour voters with those who left Labour, the biggest difference of all between them, and there are many differences, but the biggest difference of all between them is in their attitude to Michael Foot. Loyal Labour voters, well, under half of them thought that he'd make the best Prime Minister, and that compares to something like 90% of loyal Labour voters back in 1979 when Callaghan was leader of their party. But amongst those who left Labour for another party, a tiny 3% still regarded Foot as the best Prime Minister. And I think this must be said to be one of the main reasons why Labour did so badly. There were many others, of course, defence, the EEC, splits and disunity, but this really is the key reason.
And we've got a graphic on that as well. What about one other thing? What about the split in class patterns on voting? Because it was always traditionally said in the past, and everybody disputes it now, that the Labour had a sort of support among working class and skilled working class people, which was broken in 79. What did you find happened this time round?
Well, the skilled workers who went towards the Conservatives in 1979 went even further towards the Conservatives this time. The Conservatives had really quite a substantial majority amongst skilled workers, and amongst semi- and unskilled workers, who normally give a big majority to Labour, 40% voted Labour, exactly 40%.
And you've got these two questions about people, again, who left the Labour Party. Splits, 27% left because of that. Labour extremism, 33% gave that as their reason.
That's right, that's right. Loyal Labour voters were quite oblivious to these internal difficulties of the Labour Party, whereas you can see it was a major factor in those who left the Labour Party.
But you and Clive Payne and Phil Brown must be quite pleased with this study you've done, because if the predictions are as accurate, you think that these explanations of voting patterns
We're
will be
very
accurate
pleased
too.
with our prediction. We're quite amazed at how accurate it was.
Ivor, thank you very much indeed. Let's see the result which we've just had in from Belfast East, which is again by the Democratic Unionists. And here's the figures. We'll just look at this. Dennis Robinson taking the seat. Peter Robinson taking the seat for the Democratic Unionists, with the vote going up, coming from the official Unionists and the Alliance Party as well. Sinn Féin getting a very small part of the vote in this stronghold of Orange Protestant loyalism. So that's another result in from Ireland. We have 14 more results to come in. And now let's join Robin Day.
With me, John Cartwright of the SDP, one of the SDP victors in this campaign, a former member of the Labour Party, and a colleague of John Golding. Mr. Cartwright, isn't there going to be trouble in the alliance after this election? Because what's the point of maintaining two separate parties with party leaders and presidents and so on, when there's only going to be 4 or 5 STP MPs back?
Well, there's 6 for a start, so that's not too
I apologise, 6.
When it's so small, we have to be quite clear about the details.
It's a very heavy percentage.
That's right. I think in Parliament it's quite clear that there's got to be a rather closer liaison between the Liberals and the Social Democrats. We can't have separate Social Democratic spokesmen separate from the Liberals, and I think we shall have to work together very much more closely in the parliamentary scene. But I don't see there's any case for the two parties in the country merging. I think they should maintain their separate identities and their somewhat separate appeals.
Of course, you were a member of the Labour Party for many years.
Indeed.
What do you think is going to happen in the Labour Party?
Well,
because I'm finding difficulty in getting members of the Labour Party to give me their frank opinions.
Well, I'm not sure that I ought to intrude in the private grief of the Labour Party, but I would have thought that the situation would be rather interesting over the next few months. I think there would be some differences of view, should I say, amongst individual members of the Labour Party as to the reasons for this election defeat.
But who do you think will emerge as a new leader?
I wouldn't like to comment about that. I think it's not a matter for me to offer any advice on the internal affairs of the Labour Party.
I'm just asking you to chat to me, not offer them any advice.
No, I think there are a number of potential candidates who might emerge. I don't know. But I think there will be some disagreement, not only about that, but about, as I say, the reasons for the defeat and the direction the party ought to take in the future.
Do you think the alliance is to blame for a lot of Tories getting in and too many Tories getting in and for inflating the Thatcher landslide?
No. It seems to me quite clear that if the Labour Party had retained its traditional appeal, then the alliance would not have siphoned off those voters. It was quite clear that they had decided to desert Labour, and the alliance looked to them to be a credible alternative, and therefore they voted for it. If we hadn't been there, they still would have deserted Labour.
Is it fair to say that there would have been no SDP and no alliance and a different election result if the Labour Party had elected Dennis Healey instead of Michael Foot way back when they elected Michael Foot?
I think it's an interesting argument to put forward, and one could sustain it, I think, a very great deal. Yes, I think it's certainly possible that would not have happened.
What did you say to that, John Golding?
I don't think that's true. I think that a number in the SDP decide to leave because of the common market, because of defence, over issues of policy, and because they, in my view, hadn't got the courage to stand up and fight the extremism that was appearing within the Labour Party. That's why they left, and I don't think that the election of Dennis Healey would have stopped them from going.
Let me read to you what the Tribune, the left-wing weekly Tribune, says today. There's likely to be a leadership election in the autumn. We need a politician of sufficient stature to stand up to Thatcher and who at the same time commands the confidence of Labour Party members. And the Tribune editorial goes on, the defeat of Tony Benn in Bristol temporarily removes the only candidate who obviously fits the bill. Every effort should be made to get him back into Parliament as soon as possible. John Golding?
Well, I agree with Tribune particularly on one point. We want a leader not that is attractive to Labour Party members. We have to have a leader that carries conviction with Labour Party electors. And the problem still for the party, which it has had for several years now, is that there is a divorce between the requirements of the party membership and those of the electors. And it's more important, in my view, that the leadership of the party speaks to and for the electors than for the party.
And who does that point to as the next leader of the Labour Party? That very interesting analysis.
Well,
I'm following you closely.
Sir Robin, if I were to name one person, all with my skill at prediction, all the other candidates would kill me.
It might be a kiss of death, of course, as well.
It might be the kiss of death. But no, I think that it's going to be a very interesting election.
Can I just ask you this? Is Dennis Healey out now?
I would have thought that he will throw his cap in the ring, and we'll look at that cap very carefully indeed. But I wouldn't have thought any candidate is out at the moment.
Peter Shaw is a serious possibility?
I would have thought that all those that William Hills have put on their betting sheet, apart from Tony Benn, who can't now stand, all those are serious possibilities.
And you don't wish to say who your choice would be?
No, I think that, because I think that what's important for the Labour Party over the next few weeks is to build up on the coalition between the soft left and the trade unions and the soft right, to build up the coalition that has emerged over the last 2 years.
Let me ask one final question to John Cartwright. Who do you think will be the best leader of the alliance over the next few years? Is it going to be the boy David from Scotland or the boy David who is actually younger than David Steele from Plymouth?
Well, I'm biased because I nominated David Owen for the leadership of the SDP because it seems to me that a new emerging political force needs his determination, his abrasive abilities, and therefore I would always come down in favour of David Owen.
Thank you.
Well, one person isn't having to worry about arguments like that today and is free of all that and thinking simply about who she's going to put into her new cabinet. That's Mrs. Thatcher, who we've seen from various moments during this morning. We saw go into number 10 Downing Street for lunch. So let's just have a look at the past 24 hours or so in the life of Mrs. Thatcher. 13 million voters behind her. Next, Labour with only 8.5.
She's leaving now.
Here's Mrs. Thatcher.
Leaving now. Please run.
How do you react to that? 116 seats, as people predict.
Mrs. Thatcher.
Quite so. Mrs. Thatcher, now the polls, polling booths are finished, closed, would you care to give us your own prediction of your majority?
No, I'll just wait a little longer. I've waited for quite a time. We've fought quite hard. We'll wait a few hours more.
But so far you are happy?
I hope we won't have to go to fantastic.
Do you consider that you are home and dry, Prime Minister?
We think that this will be our home for the next 5 years.
Mrs. Thatcher, surrounded by a throng of reporters and aides, just making her way up the steps, past portraits of previous mayors of this borough. The wife of that mayor who selected her originally, she admitted to me that, well, she was just a little bit surprised at the selection of a woman those many years ago. She's being greeted by the mayor, that man, Councillor John Tiplady, and slowly making her way to a committee room where she will remain. And this is really the last that we expect to see of the Prime Minister until the declaration of the Finchley result at around 1 o'clock.
Margaret Hilda Thatcher, Conservative Party candidate, 19,616.
Well, Mrs. Thatcher's vote is down by 1,300 approximately. Mr. Foote has accepted defeat, I think. You must surely be claiming a very clear victory.
It is a clear victory, but perhaps the best place to claim it is not within one's own count, although one must mention it. I gained tremendous strength from being a member for this constituency. I enjoy it tremendously. But I'm very sensible of the honour that's been conferred upon the Conservative Party at what is really a historic election. To win again is a very great thing, and I mean very strongly that one does commence that second term of office with a sense of great responsibility and humility. Of the burden of responsibility that rests upon us, because in this marvellous moment when we're all thrilled, we have to remember that all power is a trust.
Sorry?
Well, look, what you have to do is that you've had a number of people in the House for quite a time. You've had a number of people in junior posts. You know, people who are climbing the ladder want to be able to climb up another rung. The terrifying thing and frightening thing for me, it's the worst job I ever have to do here, is that means having to, if some people are to come on the ladder, some people have to climb off. And it's not because they've done the job badly at all. It is because you have to keep movement in politics in order to keep
people with something to go for.
I think it was Asquith who said, perhaps in this very building, that a Prime Minister must be a good butcher. Are you a good butcher, Mrs. Thatcher?
No, I'm not a good butcher, but I've had to learn to carve the joint.
And Mrs. Thatcher is now driving up to Conservative Central Office, where she's come to pay the traditional vote of thanks to all her workers. Here she is now, coming to meet Mrs. Parkinson, Mr. Garner, and a bouquet of flowers sent specially from Jersey to one of the messengers here. And Mr. Thatcher is here, close by me, just outside Mr. Parkinson, as they're going in. Good morning, Mr. Thatcher. Good morning, Margaret.
And the Prime Minister returns to Downing Street, still smiling. Rather sooner than we'd thought. She will be lunching here in Downing Street, in fact, with Cecil Parkinson and the Chief Whip, Michael Jopling. A busy afternoon, but now some light entertainment, as, followed by a mass of cables, we join the Prime Minister as she meets the public in Downing Street.
You've done really well.
Thank you very much. It's marvellous, wonderful. She's a marvellous woman.
A final wave from the step of Downing Street, and there's always one more wave for the photographers, and away.
Just some scenes how Mrs. Thatcher and Dennis Thatcher have been spending last night and today. We've had one more Irish result in, the 5th out of the 17, and it's official unionist hold. And the interesting thing about it is that the vote of the official unionists, Clifford Forsyth, is down by about a quarter, and the Democratic Unionists up by a quarter. And whether that has any relevance or not, I don't know, but Enoch Powell's seat in Down South, he was being challenged by a Democratic Unionist, standing as an official Unionist himself. We've been told there's a recount there, so it may mean that the vote is up and that they've got into a so close that they're having a recount to see whether Enoch Powell has held the seat. We shall see. We'll keep you informed on that. Now, let's just have a look, because we haven't seen our tin brain hard at work, driven by Peter Snow here for a bit, at how this election overall, with only a tiny handful of seats to come in, 13 seats to come in, of what actually has happened. Peter?
Well, if you voted Conservative yesterday, here is the picture, the new map of the country that you helped to build up. Can we just fire off the map, the political map of the country? No? We're trying to do it, David. I think we're going to have to come back to it a bit later. We're going to have to come back and do it a bit later. It's a very exciting... Oh, there we go. No, David, I think it's happening. Yes, there it is. Now, just look very, very slowly there at each little patchwork of blue building up over the country. This is the biggest Conservative majority we've had since the 1930s. And just look how that map is turning blue. 40 gains, net gains to the Conservatives. And look how Labour have been squeezed back into the urban areas there, South Wales, Strathclyde, the Edinburgh, Lothian areas, and the North East. And there go quite a substantial number of Liberal and SDP gains in the Celtic fringe. The SDP very much now a party of the fringes. Devonport, Plymouth Devonport, Caithness, the Orkneys, of course. And there is the full map of Britain now, with only 13 more results in the 650 seats still to come. But the major difference that's happened this time is that it's really been happening for about 25 years now, but the really major move this time has been people in the country voting more and more for the Tories, and the cities staying rather more loyal to Labour than the people in the country.
It's a lovely map, Peter, that. It gives a slightly distorted impression in northern Scotland, doesn't it, where huge acres are marked as Liberal, and in fact there are more...
Only 4 seats, right.
More sheep than voters, I suspect. Well, I have with me now, and we haven't heard very much from the left of the Labour Party about their reaction to this result. One can imagine one or two aspects of it, but we haven't actually heard it from them directly. I've got with me Chris Mullin, who's the editor of Tribune, who's been very critical right through about this campaign, and was very much involved in the business of getting MPs reselected and the various changes in the Labour Party that were put through, with Tony Benn supporting them as well, which some people think have led to this defeat. Because it's led to policies that are too left-wing for the electorate to accept. Now, you don't hold that view.
No, I don't. I think that the result yesterday was really a consequence of what's been going on for a couple of years, where you've had Labour leaders commanding prime-time television to denounce their party in language identical in many cases to that that the Conservative and SDP were using. It started really, I suppose, in 1980, just after the 1980 conference, reached a crescendo during the deputy leadership election in 1981, And if ordinary people, and I can understand this, if ordinary people think that the Labour Party has been taken over by a small group of extremists, one can forgive them for being confused. It's not the Tory press that's told them that, though the Tory press has told them that. It's not the Tories that have said that, not because the SDP have said that. It's because Labour leaders have been putting that myth around in identically the same language as the SDP.
But during this campaign, we've seen people like Roy Hattersley, Dennis Healey, Michael Foot, day after day appearing in press conferences, except for minor interpretations of bits of the manifesto, basically standing by it and putting it forward in the way that you'd want.
Well, as I say, I think the campaign was only a minor part of the problem, which is much more deep-rooted and dates back at least a couple of years. But the campaign, it wasn't just a question of policies, it was a question of competence. One saw actually some quite major cock-ups during the campaign to put a most favourable construction.
What was the most major cock-up you saw?
Well, I suppose the exoset that Mr Callaghan launched over Polaris. Certainly much of the many of the attacks on Labour's defence programme were stimulated even during the campaign by Labour leaders. And that, of course, is profoundly damaging.
Well,
the other thing is that the positive arguments for nuclear disarmament were never really put. Arguments that the humblest CND member are aware of were just never put to the nation, apparently because many of the parliamentary leaders of the Labour Party couldn't work up sufficient enthusiasm for them.
What do you want to see happen now? Tony Benn is out of Parliament for the time being. Who's going to be the leader as far as you're concerned? Who ought to lead the Labour Party? Who ought to lead the left in Parliament?
I think it's a bit early to predict who the individual personality will come to the top will be. I think Ben will have a very important role to play in the future. I think, as we say in our editorial today, that his departure from Parliament is only temporary. He is the outstanding contemporary figure, not only on the left in Parliament, but also as putting an alternative to the consensus point of view. Mrs Thatcher has broken the consensus for the first time since the war in 1979 on the right, and if one's looking for a similar figure on the left, it could only be, I imagine, Ben.
And you don't think that the Labour Party could win, for instance, with Roy Hattersley as leader?
I don't know. I mean, we've done it their way, haven't we? You can't say that the campaign that we've just been running was run by the left and all sorts of extremists. It wasn't. It was the usual crowd, the old consensus establishment. We did everything they asked us to do. On our side of the argument, we certainly took a very conciliatory point of view for at least 6 or 7 months, long before they started to. We did everything their way, and we have been smashed, haven't we? So I don't think our way has been tried and tested, and certainly the electorate has never yet been treated to the Labour Party programme in any detail. It's never been argued for with anything like the same passion as Labour leaders have argued for some aspects of the SDP's programme.
Mr Marlin, thank you very much, and I'm sorry we added an S to your name.
Right.
I know it's in the singular.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Robin.
Yeah, well, I have with me the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Geoffrey Howe, Roy Hattersley, whose name was taken in vain just then and referred to as a member of the old consensus establishment, or was it an old member of the consensus establishment? I'm not quite sure. And John Cartwright, who is still there. First of all, Sir Geoffrey Howe, I know you'll wish to observe the normal courtesies and discretion, but would you like to move to a new job?
I make no comment on that at all. I'm very content to have the opportunity of continuing to be part of a Conservative government.
Indeed. But just supposing the Prime Minister would say, Geoffrey, you've done very well, would you like to stay at the Treasury, or would you like to move to, say, the Foreign Office?
Well, just suppose she did.
Yes.
She would be doing it and not you, Robin, and we shall see what happens then.
Oh, well.
Sorry, I don't mean to be discourteous, but there are courtesies about these things.
No sooner have we have to go to Labour Party headquarters for some reason.
He's even better than Brexit. He nearly broke my arm. Yeah.
I thought you said the government.
Mr. Healey has just arrived at the Labour Party headquarters here in Walworth Road. He would make no statement like his party leader. He just said, I'm not saying anything, and brushed us all aside. And my goodness, he's very good at that. Much more accomplished than his party leader. Speculation, of course, is now surrounding the question of when Michael Foot will make the announcement. I think everybody expects him to do that very shortly. Now, whether this is a matter of hours or a matter of days or a matter of weeks is not sure. But when David Basnett today, in an interview on our programme, called for him to make the announcement quickly, it was pretty clear to me that, and to everyone else here, that the announcement was going to come soon. The other thing which has been said by trade union leaders, which I find very interesting, was that Dennis Healey is now too old to become party leader. All of them, the right, the left, and the chairman of the Trade Unions for a Labour Victory, have said his age rules him out, which means I think we are looking at the prospect of a contest emerging from the second generation of Labour leaders. David, from a slightly frantic and a little frenetic Labour Party headquarters, indeed the only excitement we've seen in some time, back to you.
Well, now we're back with Geoffrey Howe, continuing Sir Geoffrey Howe where we left off, accepting that he won't let us into any cabinet secrets. Let me ask you this. Do you fear some dangers, as Mr. Francis Pym obviously did at the beginning of the campaign, that a landslide majority, perhaps this was spoken with Chief Whip's experience in mind, is liable to encourage rebels and dissident groups to form and to speak out?
No, I don't. I think the encouraging consequence of the election is that the electorate has spoken with such a decisive voice in favour of a shift to the policies of the moderate centre, if I may so describe it. The fact that the Labour Party has replaced the Liberal Party as the party of lost deposits, the fact that the Labour Party is going to have to agonise, as we saw happening just a moment or two ago, as to whether it recaptures its place on the British political stage through going further left, which seems to me to be extremely fanciful, or engaging with the two components of the so-called alliance and deciding how they can be reconstituted an alternative to Conservative government, seems to me to indicate that we can now govern sensibly with the support of the great majority of moderate opinion, making changes, for example, in the framework of trade union law, making changes confident on the basis we're going to stay within Europe, because that's the decisive conclusion, moving steadily and moderately along the lines foreshadowed in our manifesto.
But when you say you now have a decisive victory of the majority of moderate opinion, I mean, 54% of the electorate didn't want you?
No, but an overwhelming majority of the electorate rejected the policies on which the Labour Party has been battling for years. If one recognises that the alliance, you say, is totally committed to Europe, sensibly recognises the case for nuclear defence, there's arguments about degrees, recognises the case for substantial radical reforms of the trade union movement, rejects almost all the intellectual rag baggage of the traditional Labour Party. There is a great issue to be sorted out on the left, but we are confident that we can proceed, for example, with policies of improving competitiveness, effective management, privatisation of the public sector, knowing that they will be welcome, in fact, not just to our own supporters, but to the great majority of those who voted for the alliance. Overwhelming majority of trade union members voted either for us or for parties in the centre and have detached themselves from the Labour Party. And the Labour Party will have to work out what it does about that.
So, Geoffrey, you're known even to many of your critics as a fair-minded man who listens to argument and is a man of open to persuasion. Do you think it is fair that 25% of the people, 7 million alliance voters, should only get a couple of dozen seats in the House of Commons compared to 200 seats in the Commons for the Labour Party, who've only got a percentage or so more points in the popular vote?
I think that the system, as it has worked over many decades now, works effectively to represent shifts of opinion on the British political scene. We experienced during the 1920s, I suppose, the gradual displacement of the Liberal Party by the Labour Party as a party, as the alternative to the Conservative government. One of the things that strikes me going outside this country is the way in which people are impressed by the confidence and certainty with which we can move from one government to the next. We're not racked, as our people across the Irish Sea, with elections every 9 months, or people in Israel, for example, with governments being based upon the tenuous support of extremist groups. We do have a system that works clearly. It's been recognised to do so during all the years when the leaders of the Labour Party, now in the SDP, were part of the Labour Party. And I think that it probably does provide the timescale within which that sort of shift can take place.
Roy Hattersley, what do you say to that?
Well, I think there's been a good deal of nonsense talk on this programme in the last 10 minutes about the percentages and the figures and who supports what and who supports something else. The nature of our political system is the constituency vote, and the constituency vote has demonstrated two things. The first is that as a majority party, the Conservatives are very clearly ahead at the end of this election as being the political ideology as well as a political organisation that commands the greatest amount of support. And that qualifies them, much to my regret, but qualifies them to form a government. And I think the arguments about the popular vote and whether the Social Democrats have somehow been cheated is a wholly bogus argument. But the second argument, which is not so bogus, but is inherent in the system, and in a sense I accept it, therefore, is that the radical vote in this election was very much split. If you look at the Nottingham constituencies, if you look at the Leicester constituency, you'll find that Social Democrats, the Labour wing of the Social Democratic Party, took a very substantial amount of votes from the Labour candidates and therefore encompassed the defeat of the Labour Party and the victory in those areas of the Conservatives. And what we have to do between now and the next election is make sure that one party, and it can only be the Labour Party, brings together all radical opinion, all reformist opinion, all social democratic as well as democratic socialist opinion. And if we can put that into one basket, then the Conservative Party can be defeated.
As we were saying when we were interrupted, I think, late last night, Mr. Hadley, how is the Labour Party going to do this in the next 4 or 5 years, as it failed to do in the last 4 or 5 years?
Well, I know you understand this. I don't mean this at all offensively. I mean the criticism of me as much of you. That here on, 3:30 on the day after an election defeat, the Labour Party can't start describing its new position and working out its new prospectus. But what is very clear is that something like 2 million voters who are our natural voters, the people I tried to speak to from Birmingham last Sunday come home to the Labour Party, they're people who are basically unpolitical and they're unideological. They're more interested on a Sunday morning in cleaning their motor cars than in canvassing. Now, those 2 million people ought to be ours. Well, we've become detached from them, and we've got to make contact with them again. Our mistake, if you like, mine as much as anybody else's, is that we've allowed ourselves to be detached from a large segment of our natural vote. Some of them have gone to the Conservatives, some have gone to other parties, but we have not maintained their loyalty, and we've got to re-establish it.
John Cartwright, what do you say?
I think Roy Hattersley puts forward a very appealing sort of an idea, the idea of going back to the old Labour Party that I grew up with, a broad church in which, as he says, there were democratic socialists and social democrats. The problem is that I think he's going to find it very difficult to recreate that broad church. I say to him, the sort of Labour Party activists who howled me down at my count last night with chanting all the way through, who sang the red flag to drown out the speech of the Conservative candidate in my constituency, they are not interested in bringing back the Social Democrats. They want a pure Labour Party of the socialist faith, and a particularly narrow socialist faith. So I endorse his aims. I'm sure they're admirable. But I think he's going to find grave difficulty in broadening the Labour Party back to the broad, tolerant, comradely party that I knew in my youth.
What do you say? You go ahead.
Well, in many places it is exactly that. I mean, let me make clear about recreating the old broad church. I've not the slightest wish to re-establish relationships, let alone friendship, with the leaders of the social democratic movement who have encompassed the Conservatives' victory at this moment. I mean, had it not been for what Dr. Owen and Shirley Williams and Bill Rogers have done, I think we might well have beaten the Conservatives. So I'm not holding out the hand of friendship in their direction. I'm talking about voters. Now, there are very many voters who are in areas where what John Cartwright, I don't disagree with his description, where what he called the old Labour Party still exists. If you were to come to the Sparkbrook division of Birmingham, the Labour Party of the traditional values is alive and well and living in the Labour Club. And we had to swing to the Labour Party in Sparkbrook last night. There are very many areas like that. There are very many parties like that. We have to encourage them.
Sir Geoffrey Howe, do you agree with Roy Hattersley's estimate that the Labour Party might have won had it not been for the defection and the campaigning of David Owen, Shirley Williams, Bill Rogers, etc.?
No, I take exactly the opposite view. And I'm surprised that Roy Hattersley doesn't himself do so.
We might have
you
lost
see,
it.
The Labour Party is as much part of my political and emotional background as yours, surprisingly. I come from South Wales. I've worked with it, and many of my friends are old-fashioned members of the traditional Labour Party that stood for home ownership, quality and education, all the things that the Social Democratic Party has been trying to stand for. Now, this election shows that the people of this country reject those who wish to take the Labour Party towards the Albanian solution.
It's not serious discussion. The Albanian solution is really not serious discussion. It's a waste of all our time.
Let me finish the point, because I think it's very important advice.
Somebody who holds one of the great offices of state comes on television and talks about the Albanian solution.
It's precisely why I'm entitled, Roy, to speak without being interrupted in that sense.
You're not entitled to be idiotic.
It is a phrase that is actually being used in the French debate of similar issues now. That's why I use it. Now, the point is this. If the Labour Party responds to this election by saying, as the editor of Tribune was seeking to say, we must set off in that direction, then I think that they do create an immense opening for the Social Democrat and Liberal Party in some way or another to regroup. Now, if your party is to do anything at all, you have to begin contending for the ground which has been occupied by those who've defected from your party. But they and you tried to fight a battle for moderation within the Labour Party, have done for many years. They thought it was lost and they've moved off somewhere else to do it. You believe it can still be won. The one thing that will not do any good is to remain there pretending you're fighting without actually doing it.
But can I just make one point?
John.
That's what Sir Geoffrey said. I mean, my criticism of the way he demeans this argument is demonstrated further by him leaning for his points on the editor of Tribune. John Cartwright and I, who know the Labour Party, didn't believe it was worthwhile commenting on the comments of the editor of Tribune, a wholly trivial figure whose only importance in any of these campaigns is to be held up by Sir Geoffrey Howe as some sort of ogre. I mean, he's not important enough to be an ogre, and if Geoffrey Howe wants to discuss it in those terms, we're not having a very sensible discussion.
No, but his position is very much in line with the manifesto which you and your colleagues adopted, but which you did your best not to fight on. And it's that manifesto which, amongst other things, has repelled the electorate and driven into
But with respect, that is wholly untrue. I mean, I'll bore the listeners for as long as Sir Robin lets me, going through the things. Let's start with Ireland, because I think it's been a very bad day for Irish politics. But what the Labour Party manifesto said about Ireland is constantly excoriated and denounced by Tribune. I've gone example after example. This is not a Tribune manifesto on which we fought.
Well, Europe, for example.
That's one example.
Europe is the most interesting.
I mean, we took the Enoch Powell position on Europe. Why don't we bring in Enoch Powell as an example of how we drifted in one direction?
If one takes Europe as an example, you see, Roy believes, as John Cartwright and I believe, that Britain's place remains with Europe.
Of course, I've always said it.
The Labour Party fought on the election platform of wanting to get us out of Europe. It hardly mentioned it. And we've had, on every opinion poll, increasing support for the proposition we ought to stay in Europe. Now, that's the conclusion of the election. If the Labour Party is able to be persuaded by Roy, and I respect his difficulties, to come back into occupying that kind of ground, it once again becomes a serious contender for the left of central British politics. Right. If it doesn't, then it really does shift itself into outer space, and Roy will have to decide whether or not he goes with it.
Can we come back to this point that Roy is, I think, accusing us of having lost the Labour Party seats? It really is an extraordinarily arrogant approach. We apparently have no right to run candidates in a democracy. Well, that seems to be the logic of what you're saying, Roy, that if we run candidates and they get a lot of support and you are hurt as a result, then we have somehow damaged your chances.
No, you've every right to let the Tories in.
I have every right to finish my sentence too, I hope. What Roy seems to be missing is the fact that if the Labour Party appeal was as strong as he believes it should be, then however many candidates we put up, whatever activity we indulged in, people would not divorce themselves from the Labour Party and support us.
Let me ask you one final question, Mr. Hattersley. Millions of people in this country for many years have relied on the Labour Party as their protector against injustice, unemployment, abuse of class distinction, etc., etc., etc. Are they not entitled to feel that the leaders of that Labour Party, and I include you and others, have betrayed them by their quarrelling, by their feuding, by the way they've conducted this campaign, and as a result, a right-wing Tory government is landslided into power?
Well, I understand why you asked that question, and the only reason I don't approach the answer directly is my argument with your language. I think the word betrayal is quite wrong. It was a word Peter Jenkins used. Well, let me just explain. It was a word Peter Jenkins used last week, and betrayal implies intentional culpability. But I do not dissent from the view that it was the Labour Party's duty, moral duty, to do all it could to win the election. And in that, on some instances over the last 4 years, we have not behaved in a way which sensible men and women ought to have thought was the right procedure for winning the election, then we have failed people who need our support. And please God, for the next 4 years, we're going to take the position. We're going to say it's our duty to be elected. There are a lot of people who need us, who need our protection, and we have a moral obligation to behave in a way which ensures that we provide it. And the criticism, and I agree with you, over the last 4 years is that sometimes we haven't done all that was right to make sure that we were there, able to give that protection.
Mr. Hattersley, Sir Geoffrey Howe, John Cartwright, thank you. David Dimbleby.